Good evening from Jakarta and good morning for those tuning in from the United States. My name is Ray and I will be your master of ceremony for the next 1 hour. Welcome to the seventh dialogue of the Climate Hero series. This program is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, the largest foreign policy group in the country and Southeast Asia, with the support of the United States Embassy in Indonesia and the US Department of State. Each month through this program, FPCI brings a pair of climate heroes from Indonesia and the United States in a virtual dialogue with the Indonesian public. These heroes are prominent figures in policy, academia, think tank, businesses, and government who are leading the fight against climate crisis and taking steps in transforming their community for a climate resilient future. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome hundreds of participants from across Indonesia and also abroad. Welcome, everyone. And on behalf of FPCI, we would also like to thank our university partners, our FPCI chapters, our community partners, and also thank you to our media partners for supporting this event. I know everyone is excited to jump into the discussions, but before then, a few housekeeping rules. First, make sure to mute your audio and not speaking. Your camera must be turned on. Please make sure to rename your handle with your name and institutions as well. Please maintain decorum in the chat box. We encourage cordial discussions and interactions with other attendees. We also provide live interpretations from English to Bahasa Indonesia. So if you're joining from Zoom, you can click on the bottom right of your screen for language options. Kami menyediakan penerjemah dari bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia. Bagi para peserta yang ingin mendengarkan dengan audio bahasa Indonesia, dapat klik interpretations di layar bagian bawah kanan. Pilih bahasa Indonesia dan mute original audio. Untuk penonton yang bergabung melalui YouTube, kami memberikan 2 YouTube link di chat room. Link pertama untuk siaran dalam bahasa Inggris, dan link kedua untuk siaran dalam bahasa Indonesia. Next, you can ask your questions by submitting it through the chat box. Please state your name and your institutional affiliations. And last but not least, please also stay tuned until the end of the session to confirm your attendance and receive your e-certificates. We will distribute attendance form nearing the end of the sessions, so don't miss out. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have 2 very distinguished climate heroes. From the US and joining us in the early morning is James Harmon, the co-chair of World Resource Institute, WRI Board of Directors. And from Indonesia, we have Darsono Hartono, the CEO of PT Rimba Makmur Utama. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Dino Patijalal as the founder and chairman of FPCI to give his opening remarks. Dr. Dino, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Ray, and I want to say hello to everybody and thank you all for joining. Especially, I want to welcome Jim Harmon and Darsono Hartono for being able to speak at the Climate Heroes program tonight. And this is a rare occasion because both of them are close personal friends of mine. I've known Jim Harmon for, I think, over 10 years now. He is definitely a driver of the World Resource Institute, which in my view is one of the best think tanks in the world on sustainable development. There's actually a ranking for it, and WRI, which is based in Washington, D.C., but also has an office in Indonesia, is a leading player on climate diplomacy, climate and environmental research. And I've known him to be a very passionate entrepreneur and activist and thinker on climate issues. So thank you, Jim. I know it's very early morning in New York, but thank you for joining. And Darsono Hartono, I've known him also for a while. He's also on the board of WRI Indonesia, and he is actually a pioneer because I meet a lot of business people, but Darsono is one of the first and one of the very few who is trying to figure out how to connect his environmental responsibility, his climate conscience with his business activities, and he's done it successfully. Yeah, he's converted a lot of Indonesian forests for preserving them for green purposes and earning quite a good carbon credits from it. He will tell you how he's done this, but he's definitely a pioneer, and there should be a lot more Darsono Hartonos in Indonesia. So having said that, let's enjoy the discussion, because the private sector definitely is the key to climate transition, right? First is government policies, and second, in my view, is private sectors, right? If the private sector can get their act together and push the climate agenda, I think the world will become ever closer to the goal of reaching 1.5 degrees maximum temperature rise. So let's have a good discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Pak Dino. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite Mbak Dayu Nirma Amurwanti as our moderator to start the dialogue. Mbak Dayu, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone who is joining us today. Welcome to Climate Heroes. Today's topic is building a carbon-free future, which I believe is very important to us all. And not only that, today we're going to talk about the participation of private sector, but also we talk about how we collectively, globally, can provide the necessary financing and resources for the noble aim of becoming a decarbonized economy. We have two prominent speakers today. We have Darsono Hartono, the CEO of PT Rimba Makmur Utama, and we also, hello Pak, good evening.
Hello, hi Dayu, hi everybody. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon for everybody.
All right, thank you for joining us. And second, we also have James Harman, the co-chair of WRI Global Board of Directors, joining us from Washington, D.C., I believe. Hello, Pat. So let me read out their short CV. So James Harman is the co-chair of WRI, Global Board of Directors. WRI is a top global research organization working with governments, businesses, multilateral institutions, CSOs, working on 7 global challenges: food, forest, water, energy, climate, and oceans and cities. So he probably will share later on his experience in leading the Egyptian American Enterprise Fund, which is a private corporation seeded by the US government to promote development of Egyptian private sector with a particular focus on small and medium enterprises. And Pa Darsono Hartono, he is the CEO of Rimba Makmur Utama. And Rimba Makmur Utama is an Indonesian company that manages Katingan Bentaya, a carbon financing and forest restoration project on 200,000 plus hectares of peat forest in central Kalimantan, Indonesia. And I believe that he will later share about his wonderful enterprise with us. As a bit of introduction, I believe that we are all here because we're interested to learn how private sector can play a part in us collectively attaining the vision of becoming a decarbonized economy globally. And one of the key takeaways of COP26 Glasgow is that the public sector will not be able to do it alone, and the private sector will play a very key and important role in this endeavor. So without further ado, let me go first to James Harman. Can you please tell us about the Egyptian American Enterprise Fund? Because this is a very interesting scheme where you bring in public funding, private sector contribution, and the aim is basically helping small and medium enterprises to transition towards a greener business. So can you please share your experience and your leadership in this fund?
Thank you very much. Before I go there, I just want to make one comment that our Dino was one of the great ambassadors that we ever had coming to the United States some years ago. He did a terrific job of strengthening the relationship between Indonesia and the United States. And when we all met him back in the 20 plus years ago, we were very much impressed with him, and he did a very, very good job while he was here. But now I'll shift over just to say that most of my life I have been between the private sector and the public sector. And so this most recent experience in 2012, under President Obama, they created in the United States an enterprise fund, which is a fund funded by the US Congress. Congress eventually provided $300 million for us to invest in and build the private sector in Egypt. That is really the story of that fund and its success, which I give enormous credit to the Egyptian financial community and the Egyptian government. And I think that President Sisi in Egypt did a very wise thing at that moment in time in accepting an IMF program, which allowed Egypt to make a very significant recovery from a difficult period of time. With the private sector playing a role, we started to invest in Egypt. And the story is told exactly on the web. It's in an impact report, which we're required to produce by the Congress, which describes what we invested in and how it has done. Just to give you a little bit of background on it, we have now invested the $300 million, almost the $300 million, and the market value of the portfolio today is nearing $700 million. So the U.S. never made money like that in an enterprise fund like this. So it resulted in enormous profits for the U.S. taxpayer, but how that is spent will be decided later on. So financially, we invested well, but that is not a tribute to us. It's a tribute more to the talent of the Egyptian financial managers of the investments and the identity of the investments. We shifted after we saw the kinds of profits we were enjoying. We shifted towards development work, and we started to invest in healthcare and in agriculture and in education. And now we are focusing on sustainability and the environment, where there are very good opportunities in Egypt. The message that I would most like to share with everybody is the partnership between the public sector and the private sector has worked very well in Egypt, where we were able to take public sector funds and invest it together with the private sector in Egypt, and where we were able to identify very capable people, many of whom had been trained in the financial community in New York or in London or in Germany or many other countries. But that partnership between the private sector in Egypt and the public sector funding we have has resulted in very significant results. And our report, which we're obligated to do each year, discusses that, both from a point of view of returns as well as from a point of view of the development success, jobs created, gender balance, the things that we think are important that we were able to achieve. And now on climate, this major important conference, COP conference coming up, I will gladly talk about that, but maybe I should stop because you maybe wanted an introduction. I'm happy to respond to questions and give you more information, but that's a little background.
Yeah, so my question is how did the fund started? Was it because of a Congress initiative, or has there been any discussion, or is there something that the business community initiated? So how did that fund come about, really?
Yes, it started, the combination of the executive branch, the White House, President Obama, and Hillary Clinton at the State Department. The State Department first contacted me that they were creating that, and would I be the chair of it. I had served in the government. I had been chairman of the Export-Import Bank of the United States in the 1990s. So I had a private fund that invested in the developing world. So after some time, I accepted the position which was difficult because it was during the quote a revolution, a mini revolution. The Arab world was going through a very difficult time in 2010 and 2011. So the U.S. had never created a fund to help the private sector in a country during a revolution. And when I arrived there, the violence was so great that I had literally difficulty moving around Cairo. And I wondered, how could we possibly invest in a country no one else was investing at the time? It was really chaos and a lot of violence. And I think back on it and I really wonder how we ever were able to find the people, and there's so much talent in Egypt, find the people to help us to invest and to grow it. But it was the Congress and the executive branch, Obama and Clinton, who really made the decision to create the fund and then turned it over to me. There was a requirement that under the legislation that we had to have 6 US citizens and 3 Egyptian citizens. And I was fortunate to decide that the US citizens should be Egyptian Americans who had grown up or knew Egypt well and had moved to the United States. We have, as you probably know, in the United States, talent from every country that has come here. So drawing upon the talent of the Egyptian Americans together with the Americans who had really had experience in Egypt, we had a very good board of directors who have been very helpful to us. And then when I first went over and I realized the violence, there was no way we could have put Americans, quote, in an office in Cairo. It couldn't have survived during this difficult period. But we found Egyptians who could run it. And the Egyptians were the ones who really built this and have produced this enormous profits. And it amazes many people. We have shown an annual rate of return of 20% per year. The United States never had made an investment like this before, at the same time as creating enormous number of jobs and achieving things on a development basis, including, I'll be glad to talk about this later on, a climate approach that we have taken on it. So it's been a very good experience. It's that experience in Egypt, which I want the world to focus on doing in other countries that could lead to the transition to a decarbonized world. But I think I might want to stop here so I give you a chance to ask other questions or to talk to the other speaker.
Right. Yeah, before I go to Pa Darson, I think the participants will also be interested on the specific roles that this fund play. You said that there are a number of small, medium enterprises or projects and portfolios that contribute to sustainable development. Can you please share what kind of ventures or enterprises that this fund is investing in?
I think your question was, I didn't hear it clearly enough, was what were the investments that we made that resulted in this? The viewer may be interested in knowing when I arrived in Cairo, I thought that we should buy a bank because there was no lending to small or micro companies and interest rates were 18%. So most banks wanted to just buy treasury paper and not invest by taking risk of loans. So there were no loans being made at all. So by buying a bank, we could make loans to the small and micro companies. Unfortunately, the governor of the central bank in Egypt rejected that approach because he didn't want the government owning a bank. And so we were forced to make, after 9 months of study, another decision, and we bought a finance business, and we did the same thing with the finance business. But then we got lucky. Better to be lucky sometimes. We made an investment in a payment service because most people in Egypt and much of the frontier world do not have bank accounts. Maybe 15, 20% of the people have bank accounts. So if we helped an entrepreneur in Egypt to build a payment service. And so the average person in Egypt could stop in an area to pay their bills and also borrow a little bit of money. And this company called Fowry has been immensely successful and has grown very significantly. And it was our first investment. And so it proved to bring some financial inclusiveness to the Egyptian population. Today, some 35% of the population, maybe almost 30 plus million people, use this service to pay their bills and to borrow a little. So it's spread all over the world, of course, but this company in Egypt did extremely well in bringing to the Egyptians an opportunity for financial inclusiveness to pay their bills and to borrow a little bit of money. It was this success that led us to the whole question of how do we then deal with healthcare? How do we deal with education and sustainability? How can we help? How can our experience in Egypt with the talent of the Egyptian people help us to move into the question of addressing climate solutions?
Okay, thank you. Let me go to Pak Darsono. Pak Darsono, speaking about risks and novelty, I believe that when we first met, PT Rimba Makmur Utama was probably one of the first companies that is interested in having this restoration projects, working with communities. And at first, perhaps you can share this also yourself. At first, it was not carbon credit that you had in mind, but more like working with community to protect the forest and see what benefits arise from there. So can you share what Rimba Makmur Utama is doing and your experience so far, and what do you think? We mentioned or we heard that partnership between the public sector and the private sector is key. So how do you think it is going so far? What are the challenges and opportunities that you have faced?
Thank you, Dayu. It's thank you for FPCI for inviting me today here. I think for some of you who don't know who I am, 15 years ago, my business partner Rezal Kusumaatmadja, who is the son of Pak Sarono Kusumaatmadja, the ex-Minister of Environment of Indonesia in the 90s, actually gave me a proposition. He said, Darsono, there's this new business where you can save the world or mitigate climate change, providing sustainable livelihood for community, being inclusive, and become profitable for the company. So this is 2007, where sustainability is not even a hardcore. And then the product that we are selling was carbon credit. When I heard that, I was like, he must be out of his mind. Is there such thing? Will people be willing to pay for such thing? So I think with pure intention that Rezal and I have, really try to prove this idea that the world is not the way it should be, because the way we have exploited in the past 100 years due to industrialization, we see a lot of inequality that happened in the world. And we want to prove that maybe this is a business to do, right? I think for some of you who are not familiar, so we decided to restore and conserve about 157,000 hectares of peatland forest in Central Kalimantan. The project is called Katingan Mentaya Project. It's currently the world's largest forest carbon project in terms of number of credit that we have produced. But just like Dayu mentioned, it started from a pure intention that we want to restore, we want to give back to the people, and then we start thinking about selling the product. But it is a long challenge process for us. I mean, for some of you, I was the only employee of my company, RMU, for the first 6 years while waiting for the license to be given by the government. There's a lot of uncertainty, as well as not familiar with the idea that you can conserve and restore a forest, but you're not an NGO, you're private sector, and you can make profit. So there's a lot of, I think people are not very familiar with the idea, so it took us some time to get that license. In the meantime, we also are working hard the way we do it in terms of changing the paradigm. You mentioned earlier, Dayu, the idea of putting transparency, equitability, and accountability, working with communities, was the thing what was in our mind from the beginning. Because we feel that community has to be assets on this. Community has to be our shareholders, because they're the one that will be responsible and working together with us to protect the forest. So that's how we started from the beginning. The idea that, I went to school in the US, both of us graduated from Cornell. So two Cornellians have an idea to manage 2.5 times the size of island of Singapore with no background, have a dream. And here we are today, 15 years later, we manage the largest project in the world. I think it really shows the world that time has passed in a way that people start valuing things that have lost, nature that have lost, a mission that we have created, inequality that we cause. All these things come out, and especially for some of you here today, the millennials, you understand this, and it's in heart and soul of what you do. So I think we are in that moment where when you ask that question in the opening, how can business help in building a carbon-free future? We are here to do it together. This is not an effort of just our company, but I think the idea is to put more idea for private sectors that there is a path for you to make money by doing good and saving the environment. I think this is the lesson that we have to learn, from all this pandemic that we see, climate change issue that we have, that there's a path of our survival. I think we have to believe that, I remember a very well-known historian, Thomas Berry, said that human has to be a benign and mutually enhancing presence in nature. I think the past 100 years, we always treat this earth like it's ours, that we always think that we can take it without giving it back. But now it's time for us to think that we are just a steward for the earth, that we have to pass it to the next generation. So I think we are in that moment now that the world is changing, not just in the developed country, but even Indonesia. We start seeing a lot of people, a lot of these young entrepreneurs getting into business. When they look at the business, all they ask for is, am I going to make an impact? Am I doing something that have purpose, whether it's climate change or being inclusive? So I think I'm very excited for the futures to come. I think, more and more people will have idea. Technology will be available for us. And I think my journey of the past 15 years can also inspire others to stay in this path, because that's how we're going to survive and pass it to our next generation.
So what do you think are the challenges? And I mean, you have mentioned that it's been 15 years. Have you had any difficulties in accessing finance? Have the financial institutions now are getting interested in financing ventures such as yours, or is there any government support that is still needed, such as, for example, viability gap financing or de-risking instruments that is still needed by the government so that the financial institution is interested in financing all these schemes?
That's a very great question. Just to share with you the experience that I have. The first 5 years of my endeavor was about fundraising, right? Because I need to make sure that once I get my license, then I can get financing. I talked to a lot of investors at that time, whether it's local, international. They're like, Darsono, this is not going to work. We should invest in palm oil. We should invest in mining sector, because it's sure. What you're doing, not only that the product is not even proven can be sold, what you're saying that the paradigm of working with communities inclusively, it's very hard. I have an investor coming and said that, Darsono, how many guards do we have to hire to guard this 157,000 hectares? Are we going to put a wall? I mean, things like that was a mindset that we had in the past. But I think we all know we have to work with communities because they are our gatekeeper. For some, I remember Rizal wrote an op-ed in 2007 before we even started this endeavor. He said that land dictate the rules, community are the gatekeepers. So that's how we work. But it's not an easy work, Dayu. To gain trust from communities is probably the most exciting experience that I have in my life, but also the most challenging experience that I have, because it's not easy to gain trust, right? I remember that I have visited all the 34 villages, Rizal, and I have visited all the 34 villages, and just pitch the idea that you can restore and conserve forests, and they can get benefit. Even they said, "What are you selling? Are you selling carbon? And the way they see carbon is like charcoal. They're like, are we going to carry that carbon with us to places where we sell it? So I think, 15 years ago, it's such a big paradigm change. But the good news is now, the fact is there's a proof of business. Katingan Mantaya project is the largest project in the world today. It's proven that not only that we can run this sustainably, financially it's good, then the finance comes. So sometimes to be a pioneer is always hard, but I think I can see that it's going to give benefit for people to follow our path.
Yes, thank you. I would like to encourage the participants to type in their questions in the chat. So since we have a very limited time, let me start reading the question. I think this one is for you, Pat James Harman. This is from the 6th Battalion of Mahawarman Regiment of Indonesia, Bazar MY Zain. The question is, until now, equipment with carbon-free technology and other environmentally friendly technologies are still relatively expensive to small, medium enterprises. And majority of the enterprise that can afford them are the upper and middle or bigger companies. What do you think can be done so that they can have better access to such technologies? And especially, what do you think are the role of financial institutions, or do you have an experience from the Egyptian experience that provide better access to these technologies to small and medium enterprises?
One of the most important things that we have learned in the last few years is that most of the major banks in the world, including the World Bank, had difficulty reaching small businesses throughout the developing world. Most of us didn't have the infrastructure in Africa or in Asia to be able to reach them. What we found almost by accident is that this payment service that we invested in, which other countries have too, had the technology to reach the smallest micro entities. And so we tested it. We made a loan to this company called Fowry, which we asked to on-lend it to the micro businesses. And literally in a week, in a few days, they could reach thousands and thousands of small vendors all over Egypt in large numbers. And these small vendors and micro entities were creditworthy. They haven't lost. The loss ratio is very nominal. A vendor treasures the relationship where he could borrow a little bit of money, and they don't violate that by defaulting. They pay. So it's been very successful, and it's a new way to reach especially for some of the larger countries, to reach the micro and small enterprise in large numbers. So we can reach hundreds of thousands of micro and small enterprises in a day or 2 days just through this technology of the payment service. And it is quite creditworthy. So that may be the most significant thing we in the US have learned as a way to reach these micro, small entities, which we never would be able to do through the banking world. This technology allows us to do that, and everybody has it. I mean, there are payment services all over the world. So that will change, in my opinion, the availability of funds throughout much of the poorest parts of the world now. Funding will be available. We've learned 3 very important things. That was one of them. Clearly, the other thing, which we call the frontier, the developing countries, their human capital has caught up with the developed countries. So the talent in much of not the large countries like Indonesia, but through sub-Saharan Africa or Central America, there's talent now all over the world, and they can take funds available and advance them in a way that's good for sustainability and that's good for the economic development in their country. So human capital has advanced very significantly. It's no longer based in the so-called developed world. The second thing is technology has allowed most everybody now to use what is the latest technology. It's available. So the payment services we used in Egypt that the Egyptians developed is available now throughout much of the frontier world. And the last thing is that no matter what you hear about, quote, the impact of the war in Ukraine, globalization is not over. Globalization will continue. We will be investing in countries all over the world for some time to come. So capital is available in large amounts cross-border. Talent is available in the developing world. And technology has made a huge difference. So big changes in the world in the last 10 years, very big, which will be for the best. So yes, we have problems in this world of ours because of violence and the wars, but we've also made a great deal of progress, which is the reason that we were successful in Egypt, and which is the reason I think others will be successful throughout the frontier world.
Thank you. Let me go to Pak Darsono now. Let me turn to Pak Darsono. There are a number of questions for you. The first question is from Toulouse Budi Luhur University. So what do you see? Do you see any opportunities to strengthen commitment towards net zero emission? Especially you mentioned that transparency and accountability is important. And what do you think is the role of the youth in this regard? So that's the first question. Second and third are actually like related to your business. Samuel Ong asked about what type of licenses that you need in your business in doing climate restoration projects. And Stephanie asked, what are your thoughts of Indonesia implementing carbon tax? So I guess I'll stop at those three questions. That's plenty already for you.
Thank you. Those are great questions, and it's not easy to answer. But I think if you look at how the world has changed, especially the past 2 years, I think the driving force of this whole carbon-free future that we have actually is due to the support from the communities, from basically citizens who believe that we have to lower down our emission. Hence, that translates into private sector initiative, a net zero call for a lot of these private sectors. I think we all know there has been negotiation of climate change the past, I guess, 10, 15 years since Bali COP, right? I think UNFCCC has happened. And I think now suddenly you have the private sector, which is the sleeping dragon, I call it, kind of like suddenly wake up and say, no, we have to do this. So I think even if countries are not making more aggressive commitment, you will start seeing a lot of the private sectors in whichever country they are, whether it's developed country or developing countries, will make the net zero commitment. And I think it is in a way good for the companies because not only that they're doing the right thing, it's also they are doing this because they see the trend, right? I think, 5 years ago, you will not see this because people are still very shy of talking about net zero, about carbon offset or carbon credit. But I think now with a project like Katingan Mentai project, we can prove that what we're doing not only benefiting the environment, also for communities, people are more comfortable in buying offset today. There are less and less negative, basically resistance of carbon offset because of two reasons. First is because when this company are making net zero, they are doing their best to do that. There was a perception 10 to 15 years ago, company who buy offset can still pollute as much as they can. So hence offset is not going to be beneficial net for the earth. But now with all this climate justice, climate movement, all these private sector company, they are doing their best to lower down the emission. Once they cannot do it, the hard to abate one, they will get offset. And then they will still have a path. So I think it's net is a right thing and a good thing. Because it's that moment where technically you can see the transformation. I think, when company were being asked in a survey, the company that will survive for the next 100 years are companies that has purpose. When I was in school in the 90s, shareholder values are always profit. Nobody talk about anything else but shareholder value, and it's about profit, earnings, and profit. But now people talk beyond that. It doesn't have to be profit, it's about impact. So when I say company that has purpose can have survive more than 100 years, usually it breaks down into two purposes, whether it's mitigating climate change or solving the environmental problem, or being inclusive. And you can see all these companies coming into, nourish and growing tremendously. And I think it is a great moment to celebrate, right? I think all this net zero commitment that we have, not only that it's whatever they say only, but there are a lot of institutions, a watchdog to also monitor those, right? You cannot just claim that I'm net zero, but not doing anything about it. So it is a good balance where there is a check and balances of what we do. And, we're going to have better future because of that. The second question that we have is, what type of license do we need to have a carbon project, particularly in the forestry sector? So the good news is with this Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja or Omnibus Law, you can there's only one type of license that the Minister of Environment and Forestry is giving. And it can be multi-use, whether it's for logging, for plantation, or for even carbon credit, restoration, or conservation. So I think the government is really looking at this as a way to also change the business from the forestry sector. And the last question regarding carbon tax. I think Indonesia is one of the few countries that started this carbon tax, which is a good thing. The idea is to price and externalities that private sector will be able to handle and price it, right? People can argue that $2 is too low, whatever it is, but I think the initiative should be applauded because it gives a certainty. Not only that, it gives a pressure for companies to also change, right? When they start having that carbon tax, and they also couple it with offset. So you can have either you pay taxes. If you don't want to pay taxes, you can buy an offset with a company like us to replace that as a carbon tax. It also stimulates all the market for other private sectors like us to start doing it. So I think carbon tax is an exciting moment for us. I think it is basically we're declaring to the world that we want to fix this climate change issue, that we want to price it, because you have to price it first before you start getting into it. So those are the three questions that I can answer.
Thank you. As long as the price is right, then we can stimulate the right behavior. I guess that's my chosen takeaway from your responses. But James Harman, there are a number of questions with regards to your experience with regards to renewable energy projects. So George Darlington from Uganda, for example, basically asked about, what do you think of replicating the experience in North Africa and the Middle East with regards to solar-powered generation, for example? Do you think that can be replicated elsewhere? And Harry Paka basically asked whether, the emergence of hydrogen power is also a trend that we all need to look out for. And finally, Ari Nafril from Sriwijaya University basically, this is a question of what you think about the climate goals and ambition in Southeast Asia. Do you think that will be affected at all by the rivalry between the U.S. And China? So those are the three questions that we have for you.
Well, I try to answer them in a short period of time, but I agree with a lot of what the other speaker has said, so I want to endorse what he has said. But coming back to it, the relationship between the United States and China is very important. We have to do better. And I think it's critical to, frankly, the resolution of this terrible war in Ukraine. I would be happier if President Biden picked up the phone and called up the leadership in China, and if we had more meetings to seek a way to solve this terrible war. But I also think that working together with China on everything to do with sustainability and on this new COP conference is very important. So while I'm cautiously optimistic on a number of things that have been said so far, I'm hoping that the relationship between China and the US will become a more productive relationship where they communicate more frequently, where we're honest with each other and we try to resolve problems together. I think it can be done, but it's not easy. And having spent a fair amount of my private sector life in Washington, Washington is still a very confrontational environment. Our own political parties seem to spend more time fighting with each other and not enough time working on solutions, and they don't talk to each other. So it amazes me that adults who are educated, who have had a lot of experience still in the United States and come from the same country, don't work closer. But I'm hoping it gets better. There's a very important delegation from the conservative side of the Congress that's going to go to Egypt this week. And I've been in touch with them and trying to help them to understand what we did in Egypt so they can appreciate it. But it's hard work. So I've always been a little more concerned about the political side of the world than I am about some of the other things we discussed. The younger population really do see the opportunities in sustainability. They are excited. It's not just profit. It's what you're doing for the world. And there's much greater value placed on that. So those companies which are doing the right thing, they will be valued in the end much greater than those companies that are not. And that will help. So the question is not how much money can I make by investing in renewable energy. I think you can make money in renewable energy. I think you can do well in solar. So I've been very much involved in that area. But I think maybe more important to understand that those companies that approach this, trying to do the right thing for the world, are much greater valued today. And it's not just the psychic income that they generate. The actual value of the company will be greater if they're doing the right thing. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will see an increasing part of the US population and the European population focusing on that aspect. And we will see attention towards sustainability. I may not have answered all the questions. I'm happy to answer them specifically, but if you want to ask me again, I would do it. I'm sorry, I forgot maybe some portion of what you were asking me, but I do want to endorse the things that our other speaker said, because I believe that he's right.
We have, I think you answered pretty much all the questions, but we have also a question from Stephanie. So, since you're familiar with Egypt, do you have any hopes or expectations in relation to the COP27 presidency?
I do. The Egyptians have been extremely focused on this conference. It's very important for Egypt. It'll be an opportunity to showcase the progress that Egypt has made since the revolution, so to speak, of 2010, 2011. There's been very significant progress made in Egypt in a lot of areas. So this is a moment in time for Egypt to showcase that. So the government is took out all the stops to try to make this a very successful conference. And I believe it will be. And I believe that it will get a lot of attention. And the private sector is very involved in this area. There's not a meeting that I don't have relative to any of the investments we've made or will do that they don't bring up this issue. So I think we've come quite, if one can look at the dark side of the bright side clearly is that the population of the world is much more focused today on sustainability and climate and on the right things, especially the younger population. It's certainly true in Egypt. They are very focused on it. I predict a very successful conference, credit to the government and to the private sector in Egypt, which are working hand in hand with the government to make this a very successful event, and it will be widely attended and watched.
Thank you. We hope that it will be a successful one, of course. Going back to Pa Darsono, and I believe that there are. It's interesting if you look at the list of questions. It's becoming like more and more provocative. So let me go to Dewi. So she began by praising the Katingan project. She says that it's one of the highest quality carbon projects that we know. But her question is related to what do you think of the government of Indonesia's current policy restricting carbon trade or any carbon related transaction this year amidst the preparation and the formulation of implementing government regulations. So that is the first question. And the second question is from Julia Purnama, University of Palangkaraya. Since your project is in Central Kalimantan and Central Kalimantan is basically facing a lot of pressures to convert the forest, how does your project actually able to resist the pressures to have the forest being converted? So let's begin with these two questions.
Thank you, Dayo. I think those are very, very interesting and challenging questions. I think, as you know, that we have passed the presidential decree on the basically the economic value of carbon last October, right? So right now, as a company that has been, doing carbon credit, we are waiting for the more implementing regulation coming out, right? I think, we are still right now we're still put on hold. We have to wait until that regulation come out. But I think, this regulation will be monumental for Indonesia, because it really not only that we have to set the rules on how we move forward, putting a price on carbon, and how we're gonna govern voluntary market, trading, result-based payment, and also I'm actually very excited to and waiting for that to come out. I think the government, everybody know that this is not a job of a private sector only. It cannot just be a job of the government only. It cannot just be a job of community only. So this is where we intersect and intertwine, right? So I think this is this regulation have to be in a way look into that in a lens where everybody can contribute and can solve the problem. So second question regarding Central Kalimantan, our area, we were granted an ecosystem restoration license. That license gives us mandate to work in the area, working with communities. But not only that, the license are actually not allowing us to cut the forest. So we have to restore and to conserve. So I think, this is a very still last remaining piece of peatland in Central Kalimantan that's still available. What we have been able to achieve 15 years later is to basically show that there is a new path of sustainability for conservation and restoration. Because in the past, when we look into forests, we always look at forests as the trees, what we can cut and what we can log and what we can sell. But I think with carbon credit and environmental services today, and people are putting value on it, then hopefully we can have a moment where we can say that the trees are worth standing than being cut, even though it's not yet today. But I think that's the goal that we have to do. And I think one thing about Katingan Mentaya project, I think, if you want me to share my experience, and we are born out of partnership. I think if you look at the project, like I mentioned to you, I was the only employee for the first 6 years of this endeavor, but we were working together with a lot of parties. I mean, you probably know me, Dayu, at that time. I was just running around, but we work with NGO, we work with private sector, we work with think tank, we work with university, we work with the government. And I think because the fact is they don't understand what we do, but only through partnership that we can do and advance together. I think there will be more and more new business in going forward is going to come, where basically it's measured by collaboration and measured by impact. So I strongly believe with James earlier. We are fixated in valuation of our company, for example, from a private sector based on certain metrics. For example, it's called price to earning ratio, for example. But I think the world is going to change where if you're doing something meaningful, impactful, purposeful, you're going to have a different valuation matrix than people who don't. I know that they're starting already in technology basis where I remember when I was in college, somebody came to me and said, Darsono, you have to buy this stock. It's a company. They sell books. It's called Amazon. 1997. I was like, nah, what is this company? And then, but Darsono, this company is great. They're going to be able to sell all the books. But for the next 10 years, they're not going to make money. And everybody don't believe in that, right? They're like, how can it be possible? But look at where Amazon is today. So I think we have to have that different mindset when we invest in this new venture. We cannot be trapped in the old way of valuing entity or company or whatever it is. But now more and more people will see value beyond just money or cash flow, but impact and purpose. So I think it is an exciting moment. And I think the newer generation understand this more than me. So I'm looking forward to learn from them going forward.
Thank you. And 1997, some of them may not be born yet. Yeah, Pak Darsono, just to be clear. So thank you for all the participants who have posted the questions through chat. Unfortunately, we will not be able to read out or respond to all of them, but I'm sure we will find a way to make sure that the discussion still continues. So before we close, let me invite James Harman and Pak Darsono to say a few words to close. So the final question, I believe, is relating to the topic. How do you think we can build this carbon free future with private sector participation, and how do you think that we need to move forward from now on?
So I'll just close with a couple of comments. One, as the famous author Charles Dickens said, we are fortunate to live in interesting times. And this is certainly a very interesting time. I am more confident of the younger population that we are going to arrive at a carbon tax, in my judgment, and we will put a price on carbon. We will see that in the not too distant future. I see enormous progress having been made from each of the COP conferences to the next one, and I will see more progress made this year too. I'm modestly confident that we will develop a way to finance the frontier and developing countries in this important transition to a decarbonized world. That is something that much of the world is waiting to see. And I think we will make progress at this next conference on providing a mechanism for the funding of the frontier and developing countries. So I fall into the optimistic camp. The last comment is when I participate in something like this and I watch my other speaker and you, I think how much the world is the same. We could have the same discussion here in the United States or in Europe or anywhere. We are all in this together, and we can solve many of these problems working closely together. So I'm more cautiously optimistic that the younger population sees that and that we will get there. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Pak Darsono.
I think my message is now, not tomorrow, because there's no future without our action today, right? And we are running out of time. I think whatever that you do, always have to think that we are here as a steward of our Mother Earth, that we are here to pass it to our next generation. We have to not only preserve it, let's start restoring it back where nature can be what it should be to protect us. So I think, with this experience of Katingan Mentai project for 15 years, there is a path. There is a real path and there is a need. When you have a path and a need and a supply, that's where market suddenly come. So I think looking forward for the next 5 to 10 years, I think Indonesia is going to be one of the countries that will be part of the solution. for the world, and we're just excited to be part of it, and we just have to work together as one.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen who participate in this webinar. Please join me in thanking James Harman and Pak Darsono Hartono. Let's give them a virtual applause. So for their insights, I believe that from Pak James, we learned that we can invest in helping enterprises to undergo transition to a decarbonized future. And I believe that from Pak Darsono, we see that as long as we value businesses differently, that working with community and protecting the environment should be the value that we look for. And hopefully with visionary leaders like Pak Darsono and Pak James Harman, all of you can be inspired to be one, because the future, of course, depends on some of you, if not majority of you who are joining us today. So with that, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you again, Pak James Harman, Pak Darsono Hartono, and thank you, FPCI, and hope you enjoy and have great insights from this discussion. So let me return that to the MC. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mbak Dayu, for moderating the rich and insightful discussions. And thank you once again to our climate heroes figures tonight, Mr. James Harman and Mr. Darsono Hartono. Thank you so much for your time. So for our participants, please stay tuned to our social media at FPC Indo and our climate unit website at fpciclimate.org for future Climate Heroes dialogues. Thank you for staying with us, and don't forget to fill in the attendance form for the e-certificates in the chat books room. You can already see it in there, and you can just fill in the form to get your e-certificates. Before you leave tonight, we encourage you to take climate action by signing up petitions at change.org/daruratiklim, as written in the chat box, to collectively ask for a net zero world by 2050 and a 50% emissions reductions by 2030. Once again, go to change.org/daruratiklim to collectively ask for the net zero world by 2050. We hope you're doing well. Thank you and stay safe.
How come the Indonesians are all thin?
Halo, saya Mika Tambayong.
Saya Krisdayanti.
Saya Kalista Iskandar.
Saya Reza Radian.
Saya Chico Jericho.
Saya Chelsea Islan.
Saya Cinta Laura Kiel.
Saya Dian Sastrowardoyo.
Saya Wulan Guritno.
Saya Julia Stel.
Saya Yosi Surasa.
Saya sangat semangat menyongsong Indonesia Emas.
100 tahunnya merdeka pada tahun
2045 nanti.
Kita semua di Indonesia bermimpi dan menginginkan agar bisa mencapai tujuan Indonesia Emas di tahun 2045.
Sungguh suatu capaian sejarah yang indah
dan luar biasa dalam perjalanan bangsa kita.
Nggak kebayang betapa hebatnya Indonesia Emas nanti.
Insya Allah pada tahun 2045 saya akan mulai mewariskan Indonesia kepada putra-putri saya.
Di usia NKRI yang 100 tahun nanti,
saya ingin kita semua hidup dalam Indonesia yang Pancasilais,
yang modern,
maju,
makmur,
sejahtera,
hijau, adil, aman,
bebas korupsi,
demokratis,
dan tentunya bersatu.
Tujuan tersebut bukan tanpa tantangan.
Ancaman terbesar di tahun 2045 bukanlah pandemi.
Bukan lagi kemiskinan atau kebodohan.
Bukan separatisme.
Bukan perang nuklir.
Bukan invasi militer dari luar.
Ancaman terbesar bangsa Indonesia
Di tahun 2045 nanti,
the mother of all problems adalah
pemanasan global,
di mana suhu bumi rata-rata akan naik
3-4 derajat Celcius.
Itu adalah suhu terpanas sepanjang sejarah manusia. Suhu terpanas di bumi kita yang sudah berusia 4,5 miliar tahun.
Suhu tinggi akan membuat planet bumi sakit parah.
Saya tidak mau melihat Indonesia Emas dan anak-anak kita nanti
hidup sengsara dalam bumi yang panas ini.
dengan perubahan cuaca yang ekstrim di mana-mana.
Polusi merajalela dan membunuh puluhan juta orang.
Hujan deras dan banjir di mana-mana.
Gunung es di Antartika terus mencair.
Air laut akan naik setinggi 1 meter.
Sumber air dunia akan berkurang dengan sangat drastis.
Banyak pulau yang akan tenggelam.
Semakin banyak spesies punah yang disebut the sixth extinction.
Keragaman hayati akan rusak. Suhu air laut
yang naik, ekosistem laut yang terancam, serta terumbu karang yang banyak mati.
Penyakit semakin banyak menyebar, termasuk malaria.
Stok pangan menurun banyak dan kekeringan di mana-mana.
Banyak tanah yang akan menjadi padang pasir tandus.
Dan konflik berbasis lingkungan yang meningkat juga secara drastis.
Semua ini akibat ulah manusia.
Namun, malapetaka ini dapat juga dicegah oleh manusia.
Karena itulah, ayo kita selamatkan Indonesia dari bumi panas.
Mari kita mulai mengurangi emisi gas rumah kaca Indonesia.
Ayo kita kurangi emisi gas rumah kaca 50% di tahun 2030.
Dan kita kurangi terus sampai akhirnya kita bisa mencapai nol emisi di tahun 2050.
Ayo hijaukan ekonomi kita, jaga hutan kita.
Jaga ekosistem laut kita.
Kembangkan energi bersih dan kurangi segala emisi karbon dalam kehidupan kita.
Sehingga Indonesia Emas 2045 akan hidup dalam bumi yang nyaman, sehat, dan bahagia.
Sehingga Indonesia dapat menjadi bagian penting dalam solusi global perubahan iklim.
Planet bumi harus kita sembuhkan dari sekarang.
Target besar dan mulia ini bisa kita capai.
Ayo kita bergotong royong.
Selamatkan planet bumi.
Selamatkan umat manusia.
Selamatkan generasi kita dan generasi seterusnya.
Kita sambut Indonesia Emas yang penuh harapan.
Selamatkan Indonesia 2045.
Sadarkah Anda, kita mungkin adalah generasi terakhir yang bisa hidup dalam dunia bercuaca normal. Kita juga adalah satu-satunya generasi yang bisa menyelamatkan umat manusia dari bahaya bumi mendidih yang menanti kita selamanya di depan. Ayo kita penuhi panggilan planet bumi, panggilan umat manusia, dan panggilan sejarah. Ayo sebarkan pesan ini dan tanda tangani petisi.
Okay, thank you everyone. Once again, we would like to remind you to fill in the form. The form is already in the chat box to get your e-certificates. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.